is only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
Hello and welcome to episode 66 of the Talking to the Dead podcast. This week again I'm out and I couldn't resist but to come to exactly the same spot that I came to last week. It's a wonderful park and I discovered it a few years ago, but I haven't been here until last week, and I love it. It's so nice to sit here, and I'll take another picture, and you're surrounded by geese and swans and a beautiful pond, and the meadow is full of daisies and people are walking their dogs. It's very, very peaceful, and the sounds of nature. So I'm really happy to be here again this week, and I had that feeling that I needed to be here because there's some things that are going to come through to me, I know. But first of all, I would like to lay out, if you like, the circumstances for what I'm going to talk about this week. As you know, in the last few weeks, there have been huge issues in the world. And again, this I think all links to the episode that I talked about last year, where it was all getting a bit frightening because it was being said to me that there was some huge, great big issue coming, either related to some form of disclosure or something to do with world events. Well, that time came and passed, and huge issues did take place, but we, I think, managed to avoid a cataclysmic war between, say, Russia and America and the rest of us, and everything else that was going on at the time that we probably only know a fraction about now. And we managed to miss it by the skin of our teeth, I think. And it might well have been because of the intervention, again, of interdimensional or extraterrestrial entities that have, as I've learned in the last few weeks, been here for millions and millions of years and share this earth with us, and represent probably a lot of our ancient historical accounts of strange animals or devils or goblins or whatever it might be, or vampires. These probably are just our ancient people and not so ancient people citing these cohabitants of the earth. But before we get to all of that again, what has happened? Well, we obviously know that the Catholic Church lost their leader. What a year to have lost their leader. And I believe starting on Monday, there's going to be the conclave to elect the next pope. But that obviously had cataclysmic effects for the Catholic Church. We've had Donald Trump in the United States really upsetting the apple cart again, talking about imposing sanctions on all economies who wish to import goods into the United States. Obviously, that's causing, again, a massive upheaval in the financial world. And then one of the biggest issues that really grabbed my attention was this. If you may not have heard of it if you're listening to this in the United States, but if you're living in Portugal and Spain, you certainly know about it. And I think it was last week where suddenly, inexplicably, in the early evening, all the electricity went out. Now, we're not just talking about all the electricity went out in Barcelona or Madrid. It went out in the whole of Spain, the whole of Portugal. I've actually seen a satellite photograph, and it shows how the electricity is fine up until the French border with Spain. And then suddenly it's just dark. It's like those countries were returned temporarily to the Middle Ages. And just a few little lights along the coast, which are probably generators or something. But yeah, and I spoke to my friend in Spain by text, and she told me yes, it was a big issue, and it came back only after quite a few hours. Luckily, I don't believe it's caused any tremendous lack of health problems for people. I think maybe one or two people sadly did die. But I think it showed people two things. One, and this is my take on it, how these things can suddenly come like natural events, and the governments and the power companies have absolutely no control over it. The second thing that struck me was immediately the media decided to say that, oh, well, it was something to do with a very rare atmospheric event. Well, of course, again, it sounded like the disinformation machine was suddenly in overdrive and trying to prevent the Spanish people and the Portuguese people from actually knowing what really was going on. And I immediately felt this was not the story. And it's not because I'm a raging conspiracy theorist particularly. It's mainly because I felt that there was something bigger going on. Now, even my limited knowledge of science knows that you're not going to talk about a complete or two countries' lack of electricity because of some strange atmospheric event. The only atmospheric events that I've ever read that are capable of doing that relate to perhaps solar flares or the detonation of some electric magnetic pulse weapon in space. To me, that is the only way that would have happened. Or later on it could have been some sort of hacking, but even hacking would be very localized. It wouldn't take out whole countries. The systems can't be that bad. And in spite of the Spanish Prime Minister and others trying to say, oh, we're going to get to the root of it, apologize about the noise because this is the Cologne rubbish people picking up all the rubbish that people leave behind. Obviously, after a Friday night, as I mentioned last week, people don't really care about the environment and they drop their pizza boxes everywhere. So in spite of what the Spanish Prime Minister tried to say that, we're going to investigate this and we're going to get to the bottom of it, it's all gone extremely quiet. Nobody's talking about it anymore. But I have read accounts that there must have been something going on. But of course, I believe that this was related to extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings. I believe it was a power show, as has happened an awful lot recently. It's a way of actually getting the attention of the world that no matter how superior we feel, they have the capacity to take out the whole power in a country just like that if they wish to, and return it as quickly as it went. Of course, not a lot is being said about that. There is some acknowledgement that there may have been some sort of interference. There's even an acknowledgement that maybe something was going on in space that we don't know about. For all we know, there could be some form of defensive maneuvers going on in space against something or other, but we're not being told. But it's interesting again how people are just so lame and really have just become so meek and mild in the face of governments that they really don't question it. They just accept it. They're saying, oh yeah, it must have been some freak environmental atmospheric event. That's it. No, nothing to see here. When I think anybody who's got any sense knows there's more to it than that. Then next, I'm drawn back to Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk. As you know, I did an episode there and I was intrigued about that cover-up that happened originally 1980, in December 1980, when a group of American servicemen witnessed firsthand what I suppose you'd call a close encounter of the third kind, and actually saw an alien craft and a bunch of lights flying over the forest. And I've only just started reading the definitive book that's come out. I put a link in that Rendlesham Forest episode to this book. It's called Not Human. But there is so much more about that incident and what exactly was going on in those Air Force bases that aroused the interest of extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings. And that, there's so much written that extraterrestrials or interdimensionals are always attracted to our work with atomic energy. And they seem to make themselves known, usually above American or British or German or whatever, any base that has a nuclear weapon store or has, missiles that are ready to launch. They also seem to appear over nuclear sites. if you remember the Lacerta files, there was an explanation that perhaps there are some races of extraterrestrials or interdimensional or terrestrials that are here with us who need that energy and are very interested in monitoring what we're doing with it, as well as various other terrestrial beings that live with us who are very worried what we're doing to the planet and that we may blow it up at any moment, because any form of any release of a nuclear bomb would no doubt have devastating effects on their own communities, which are either under the oceans or deep underneath the earth that we're on top of. So there is a tremendous interest, it would seem, in some beings in what's going on, and are we behaving sensibly with nuclear weapons. I just moved my bicycle and myself closer to the lake, away from the road, because it's got a lot of people coming up and down on their bicycles, and they look at a man standing there in his bike gear talking into an iPhone and probably wonder what's going on, and they all seem to be stopping and looking at me, so I didn't really wish to attract too much attention. So there we go. Yes, very interesting. That link to another episode and why I was drawn to Rendlesham Forest, and of course this book, which is very, very interesting, which is indicating that so much is happening still in Woodbridge and in Rendlesham Forest, the RAF base, and there was tremendous amount of research that was going on at the time with a particular type of secret radar, which may well have intentionally or unintentionally caused these craft to be attracted. Now, again, you have to keep an open mind on this, and you may think, well, what's Philip doing again? He's talking about UAPs when this is a Talking to the Dead podcast. Well, I think those of you who have listened to the last few episodes will realize that it's all the same thing, and this is why it's so fascinating to me. When we're talking to dead people, we're not talking to dead people. We're talking to us and what happens to us when we're no longer physical. And what happens to us when we're no longer physical is that we enter another dimension, one of almost limitless dimensions, but dimensions that are very, very close to our Earth dimension. And it gets harder and harder, as we found in previous episodes, to communicate with interdimensional beings that are in very high dimensions. Now, of course, a lot of religions have described this, and they've described the different layers of reality. But of course, obviously, I've seen that firsthand in my podcast, so I encourage you to go back to those episodes where I'm with Neil Peart, and he takes me through a number of these dimensions and describes what happens to our soul when we do die and the various dimensions that we can inhabit. But I know, obviously, from those episodes that I can't see an awful lot. I can only see a few dimensions up. My radio receiver while I'm alive is just not capable of getting into really high dimensions. But that's why it's so significant, because interdimensional beings obviously have the capacity to come into our dimension as well as exist in their own dimension. And for all I know, they have the capacity to go into a range of other dimensions as well that I can't see. And so a lot of the interest for me is when we die and we move into our interdimensional state, we then suddenly have an understanding of being interdimensional and being with these interdimensional beings. And for all I know, maybe some of these interdimensional beings are actually visitors who were once living on Earth. Now, that sounds a bit crazy, but that came through to me as well, that it's a choice that you can make. When you're interdimensional, you can choose to come and visit and sort of like have a holiday on Earth if you want, just to go and look at the things that brought you happiness and gave you memories, or perhaps even go back and see family members, or locations like the churches that you worked in. All of that is completely possible if you're interdimensional, because you're not tied to the physical world anymore. You can just potter around and see other dimensions. And of course, not just our dimension, but dimensions which contain other alien species to us, or other realities, or different forms of life, intelligent or otherwise, and different times, whether it's looking at the Earth in the past or in the Earth in our terms in the future. So all of this, dear listener, is all related, and so therefore I have absolutely no qualms about talking to you about what is happening with the disclosure movement and the awareness that amongst scientists more and more that we are just part of a huge interdimensional network. So I've managed to find myself another beautiful seat, a bit like last week, which is high on a hill. Well, when I say high on a hill, by the side of the lake. And I'm just on my own up here, and it's very quiet, and I can have a beautiful view of the lake. So, so another thing that came to my attention, which I was really drawn to, which I want to talk about as well, was a podcast between some of my readers' favourite right-wing journalist. I'm saying that with huge irony, because I know a lot of people think this man, Tucker Carlson, is a complete lunatic, and after mentioning him in previous podcasts, I got quite a lot of advice to that direction. But anyway, doesn't stop me listening to him. I think he's a very interesting journalist. I'm sure people will think I'm mad too, so who cares? And he was having a wonderful interview with a lady called Catherine Fitz. Now, I don't know much about her, but she was a former Bush administration official. And her full name is Catherine Austin Fitz. And she talks about how America's leaders gave up on the country in the 1990s, and you have to believe this, and began stealing trillions and built a digital prison to control the population. She talks about how the economy is just one of two economies. There's a real economy, and then there's this economy run by this shadowy group of people, parallel, made up from the trillions it's been stolen. And eventually this shadow economy will take over the economy we're in, and it'll all be using currency which is digital, and it'll control us completely. It sounds very much like Revelation about the mark of the beast. It may be a slight pro-Christian view as well, because there are mentions that obviously being a Christian is somehow going to shield you a little bit from all of this. So you have to be a little bit more inquiring about when you hear people like that talking, because they obviously do have an agenda. And I know that Tucker Carlson is Christian as well. Nothing against Christians. I'm just saying, remember, like a good journalist, to listen to all sides. But she certainly talks about how control of people through currency is going to be the way that we are going to be eventually controlled. And that could be also have sanctions to it, because if people control your money, which they will control through your phone, I presume, they then control what you buy. They can limit the radius of what you can buy from what distance because of GPS. So, you're only allowed to buy within a certain area, or if they know where you are when you're buying things. So you are under complete control by this shadowy group of people who are going to run the economy, because they know where you are, they know what you're buying, and they can stop you, and they can make things unavailable to you. They can they can do also, which I've heard about lately too with some more right-wing people, they can debank you, which means you'll suddenly find that nobody wants to host your banking details, and you won't be able to buy or sell or trade. You will not be able to physically exist, and you will starve unless you've got your own farm. So she talks very interestingly about what she considers to be the rather unpleasant future, where we are basically in control of shadowy financial entities, and there's nothing we can apparently do about it, because this has been going on for quite a while. And she wants, and I haven't seen any proof, this is just her talking, but she talks about that there's secret underground bases all over the US, but all over the world, that have been built using trillions of stolen money over the years. Quite what's in those underground bases, I don't know, but she does allude to maybe these are places where the rich and those who are in control, who want to see an alternate future, are building, if you like, bunkers in order to protect themselves from, I presume, some cataclysmic event which will wipe out the vast majority of the population on Earth. And I listen to this more and more, and it sounds completely frightening, but I felt I needed to share this with you, because it's not a million miles away from things that I've been feeling and read about and heard about. But she believes that the end is coming, and people who are orchestrating this, as well as in knowledge of it, are in, if you like, some sort of pact with interdimensional beings. They know that the only way to save the planet Earth from destruction is to create an alternate civilization. And this creation of an alternate civilization, by the sound of it, it sounds very James Bond, seems to favor the rich and those people with the means to build bunkers underneath the ground. And you hear a lot about people like Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and whoever it might be, the guy from Facebook, building bunkers in New Zealand in case of a nuclear catastrophe. I don't know, but this is what she says. It's something that is not going to worry me on a day-to-day basis, but it's something that she talks about, and I found it quite interesting. Yes, so she really feels that it's important that we all kind of, if you like, wake up and come to this realization that we as people are pretty superfluous to this group, to these groups that have come out of ancient times. They've come out through various quasi-religious groups, such as Freemasonry, or I think some sort of Knights of Malta, I think she mentioned. I think these are people that go back almost to, the times of the Great Crusades. This sense that there has always been, and I suppose this links to a lot of what the right-wing media like to talk about, the great alternative governments that are out there, that are really running the world, through Bilderberg and things like that. Now, I listen to it and I am somewhat skeptical, because it does definitely play into these conspiracy theories, but I'm only picking it up because I was drawn to it, and her particular podcast with Tucker Carlson talking about bases and talking about people who've got some slightly distorted ideas about what they're going to do with the planet. Worth having a listen to, and I put the link below. So the next part that I just wanted to mention before we move away from Catherine Fitz, and it's something that perhaps my listeners know an awful lot about and I don't, but I've heard of this show. I think it's called Three Body Problem. But it's interesting to say, to tell you what Catherine said. So I'll just quickly read to you, because I find this interesting, and I think it's worth doing a bit more research. She said, "I think the thing that got me to read Three Body Problem was Obama made some cryptic comment about people ought to read this book. It was like a hint. And here are the problems I'm dealing with. And the three body problem is about other bodies that come into the solar system, and it's impossible to project their trajectory. And then when they do, they create this catastrophic flooding and earthquakes and all this other stuff. Anyway, but I think that whether it's a pole shift, a magnetic pole shift is one of the theories of what causes these events. But there is a history of near extinction events. And one of the things that I've looked at, because I'm trying to figure it out, between fiscal 1998 and fiscal 2015, there were 21 trillion of undocumented adjustments in the United States government. And so the question is, where is all this money going? And one of the things I've looked at in the process of looking at where all this money is going is the underground base and city infrastructure and transportation system that's being built. In the United States and all over the world, from 2021 to 2023, I took some of the smartest people and we managed to find how many alien bases we guess are there, and we estimate it's about 170, and these are bases not just with aliens but also with this alternative government. And Catherine goes on, but she mentions how governments have discovered a long time ago free energy, and technologies that they've managed to get from other non-human entities to generate free energy. And these are used apparently in a lot of these underground bases. And she describes that she's had contact with people who've been involved in building of these, who've seen not of this earth power plants that are there. Now, this whole segue into alternative forms of energy led me suddenly to Nikola Tesla. And now Nikola Tesla, I'll put a link down below to who he is, but I'm sure many of you know, he was an extremely famous scientist who died, I think, during the Second World War in quite mysterious circumstances in his hotel room in New York City. And when he died, everyone was pretty much discrediting him. Although he had invented a number of things, he was known almost as the father of electricity. And he had managed, he claimed, not only to communicate with extraterrestrial dimensions, but he also said that he'd been able to project electricity wirelessly, so people would never need cables again. He'd also discovered perpetual motion machines, which of course anybody who talks about that is considered to be a complete nutter, because it somehow conflicts with Einstein's theories as well as Newton's theories about motion and conservation of energy, etc., which mean apparently they are physically impossible, but apparently he made it work using magnetism and electricity, and he designed it, and he managed to create the potential for a power station which would produce totally free energy. And I think his research went on, and it, of course, certainly during the war, it raised a lot of attention of the United States government. And when he died, all his papers were taken. All his lab records, everything that he'd ever done was taken by the United States government and locked up in storage. And only some of it has been returned to the family and to the Tesla Museum, I believe in Poland, where he came from. But huge amounts of the Tesla papers are still under lock and key and considered highly secret, top secret, and completely classified from us. And that's led to some people saying that even technology can be classified. And I think it's mentioned in this podcast as well with Tucker Carlson that the American government long ago has managed to classify whole areas of science which are not allowed to be researched unless they are within approved agencies, mainly probably private contractors, not even in universities of research. And this is because they don't want people discovering, I presume, what Nikola Tesla managed to discover, that given the right circumstances, in the right way, and with an understanding of alternative science and theories that we're not even able to know about, you could produce things, probably with a bit of alien help, I don't know, that could provide free energy. Why is that such a thing? Why would they not want to share that with the world? Well, because if you gave everyone free energy, then people would be independent. They wouldn't be beholden to governments and power structures. It would give people a form of independence to be able to do what they like. And in many ways, we as a human race have always been subject to rule and authority because of power, the ability of power, the power to generate, whether it was power to generate food or to generate items that we could live with. Everything now is using electricity. More and more people are having electric bicycles, electric cars. Everything in the home is electric. Everyone is being encouraged to generate electricity at home with solar energy or wind energy. Nuclear power is generating electrical energy. It's such an important thing, and there's so much money behind it, and some people have invested such a lot of cash in it. You know, what they're doing in CERN with the Large Hadron Collider and the next one they're going to build, we've discussed that before, but it's generating some form of understanding, public understanding at least, of what's going on at the quantum level. But it all involves huge amounts of electricity as well. And I don't think it's a coincidence that people like Nikola Tesla had their research taken away from them, and anyone generally was debunked who talked about limitless energy, much the way as people who are talking about UAPs or life after the death, for that matter, are debunked if they want to keep us from talking about it. So fascinating to suddenly look at that segue and go into the life of Nikola Tesla, and to see that apparently even Donald Trump said during his election process, much as he'd said about exposing the JFK papers, which he's done partially, but he hasn't given all the papers at all. He's given a certain amount of them, and I know journalists are still ploughing through them, but he hasn't released all the JFK papers at all. But he said he was going to release the Tesla papers, and he was going to release the 9/11 papers and all of this. Well, yeah, those who don't believe it will say, well, they never existed in the first place. It was just a way to get votes. Those who believe they exist said, well, what did you expect? He's hardly going to be doing that. He just said he would. Same as the UAPs and what happened over New Jersey and other places in Germany and England, when people suddenly saw all those lights towards the end of the year over nuclear bases. He said he was going to tell everyone. Well, he hasn't, and there's nothing to see there anymore. Nobody's talking about that anymore. In fact, everyone's talking about just the price of eggs and customs and tariffs. So an amazing amount of disinformation. So the likelihood of us finding out about free energy and stuff, well, the good news is that we are at least getting more and more people who feel that they can whistleblow, that can come forward and start talking. And I suppose that's all part of where we are, living in really exciting times, where we will be able to slowly, I hope, and surely find out the real truth of what's going on around us. So lastly this week, I just wanted to also draw your attention to another thing I saw. Again, it was with News Nation and Russ Coulthart, and I found it quite fascinating that he's managed to find another whistleblower, and I'll put a link to that show as well, who is coming out now, and he used to work in the Pentagon, and he was involved with the aerial anomaly group and all the people who are actively involved in the Pentagon in doing research into visitation by non-human entities, the capturing of alien technology, and yes, the big cover-up that's been going on for 50 years. And he claims, and he's going out on record now, and I think he's only just started, it's going to happen over the next few weeks. He claims that he has seen in the Pentagon, given his level of clearance, pictures of extraterrestrial or interdimensional craft. He's fully aware of this program that was called Immaculate Constellation, that I think this guy Jake Barber talked about, which was a secret government program which talked about gathering as much alien technology as possible, doling it out to private contractors in order to see if they could backwards engineer it and use it for potential weapons or for science. And he's seen all of that, and he's seen quite a lot that he's not talking about, but quite a lot he has seen. And he is he's again a very persuasive character, and he was in some ways completely shocked at what he saw, and in the end this obviously led him to leave, because he realized that what he had seen completely changed his whole view of the world, and that what we have been told and how we have lived our lives for the last 50 years is almost a lie, because the government has been withholding, and not just the United States government again, but also the government of the United Kingdom, Germany, Russia, Japan, Israel. All these governments are holding on to these secrets, but it's such a hot potato. They cannot afford to release this information because they just don't know what sort of uncontrolled chaos would happen if this stuff got out. But it's coming, and it's coming slowly, and in a way, if America doesn't do it, maybe China will do it. Maybe more often than not, people are talking about this disclosure movement now is completely unstoppable, And even if America is trying to resist a disclosure as much as possible, before long, maybe the Chinese will announce it, because they want to get all the kudos that comes with being the first. They're already talking about, in this generation being the first back into space, and the first with the best AI chips, and so it's not going to be long before they start talking about, well, you know what, this is the truth. Anyway, this whistleblower is talking about that as well. And again, if you believe all of this, again, it's pretty astounding. It seems to be inconceivable that all these people who are proven who they are, they're not liars, they're not actors, they were very highly thought of, very highly trained, very experienced people working for the United States government in various capacities. And this particular chap had come across through the secret internets and intranets that they use all sorts of documents, all sorts of pictures of craft, and descriptions of body retrievals of non-biologics, they call them, and communications that we have and have had for years with other races of non-human entities. Fascinating stuff. Again, you'll say, why is Philip talking about that? Because if we suddenly can accept amongst us all here that we have had communication with non-human entities, then it's so much easier, I think, for everyone else to believe that we as a human entity are much greater than just our physical body, and that we do have, when we die and when we're alive, if you like, a non-human side of us that can connect with these entities. And this whistleblower has talked about all the various programs that the United States government and others have run based on what I think they called psionics, where they've learned to communicate, maybe well or not so well, with some of these non-human species, because they don't use language, they use thought. And they use forms of thought and direction that we just don't really know how to use. Some people are born with the ability. Maybe we as humans have always had that ability, but maybe they've lost it. We've talked about that before. But, governments are actively involved in the communication with various non-human entities. Whether they are under our feet, whether they're under our oceans, and he's seen the evidence of these bases, which, surprise, surprise, are in the Pacific and quite near to things like Bermuda, which, of course, then open up all the stuff about the Bermuda Triangle. I'm always a bit nervous about that. But, he's seen that these bases exist there. They exist in Alaska. They exist in South America. They are there, and they have not only non-human entities, but they have scientists from our human governments who have been working with them in collaboration for a long, long time. Well, as I started this podcast this week, it was all about the things that seem to be happening, massive world events, massive signs that there is communication and there is disclosure, and we are going to be told more and more. Whether it's going to happen this week or next week, I don't know, but it's definitely happening. And in the last week, so much has happened already. And I think the pace of disclosure is quickening. And it's an extremely exciting time to be alive. And I would really hope from all of this that once we've got all of this out the way and we realize the ultimate truth that perhaps many people have known for hundreds and hundreds of years, and perhaps has been the basis of their secret societies and their belief systems. Maybe once when we finally get it all out of the way, that there is no death, and that it's just a process that enables the human soul to go back to being an interdimensional entity, then how wonderful that will be for us. Should we wish to communicate with people that are now, as we would see, dead, in a more open and transparent way, it will become possible for us to do that. How would that be? How would that be if there was no death anymore? That it would just literally be, okay, well, Harry is not alive anymore, but we can communicate with him anytime we like. We can communicate through a particular device or through a particular means of communication that perhaps we're not aware of. What would that do to us as a society if that was still possible? Would they still have an influence on the people who are alive? I suppose that could be quite interesting, because would you really want people who have passed on to be influencing the lives of the people who are still here? That could have huge implications for people. Suppose, just making this up on the spot, suppose that my wife died and I marry another woman. Would that cause an issue? Would there be some form of communicational disagreements going on? I don't know, just in a very trivial way. Let alone, of course, how do you account for the people who have led less than what we would call perfect lives? We've discussed that before. We know that everyone has a purpose. But I suppose all that's going to happen really is that by finally being able to communicate, we are just basically part of the whole scheme of existence, where we do choose our lives and we choose what we do to learn. So we perhaps should not be so surprised. Would it trivialize our human life maybe a little bit? Would people think, well, what's the point of being human if there is so much out there? I don't know. I really don't know. And maybe we're not supposed to know. Maybe we're not. Maybe we're supposed to carry on with our lives, and we really shouldn't be allowing too much of this stuff that's going on outside to interfere with this world. Maybe it spoils the surprise. I don't know. And a lot to think about this week. And all that stuff is coming to me as I sit here in this beautiful nature. And again, as usual, I just see how wonderful the world is. What a beautiful planet we have, and how lucky we are to be alive in it. But equally, I think we should be lucky if we can find out that we are not alone, or that the people who've lived with us or lived before us, who are no longer here physically, are there and are communicating with us. And if we really open our minds, maybe one day they will be able to communicate as much as if they are physically here. And what would we do with that information? Thank you very much for listening. It's been, quite a lot of ifs this week. Bye-bye.